Hello everyone and welcome to week 1 of Anthropology 1, Biological Anthropology. I'm your instructor, Adam Garzoli, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to the study of biological anthropology. Let's begin by thinking about human origins. In the image on your screen, you are looking at the past and present of the human species. On the right, you see a fully modern human skull. On the left is a skull from a cave in Morocco, dating back approximately 300,000 years. It represents the early stages in the emergence of anatomically modern humans. Traces from our past, of which this is just one, are being discovered and rediscovered all the time, and are fundamentally changing our understanding of our origins and evolution. Now, there are important differences between the two skulls. As you see on the bottom left, for example, the 300,000-year-old skull has an elongated brain case. Nonetheless, the two skulls bear a striking resemblance to one another. The 300,000 years that divide us are nothing but a blink in the eye in the history of our evolution. Having had that moment to contemplate human origins, which is at the foundation of our studies this semester, I would like to give you a brief lecture overview. These are the major topics we will be discussing in today's video. First, what is anthropology anyway? And what is biological anthropology? Many of you will not have had a formal introduction to anthropology or biological anthropology. It's not a subject that's really covered in the high school curriculum, so this will be your formal introduction. Next, we'll talk about the 6 big events of human evolution and outline those. Third, we're going to talk about what science is and why biological anthropology is a science. Fourth and finally, we're going to be talking a little bit about the sociology of science, specifically the 4 Mertonian norms of science, and the reason that we're going to discuss that is because I want you to be able to approach science with a critical lens. So what is anthropology? Anthropology is the study of humankind, past and present. This is a perfectly suitable definition, yet it is not the only one. Anthropology, as broad and expansive a subject as it is, can be defined in any number of different ways. We may consider the following definitions. First, the study of humankind viewed from the perspectives of all people and all times. This definition positions anthropology as a holistic discipline. That is, it is concerned with all human beings from all times and with every aspect of their lives. 2 more definitions that we may consider. A scholarly field of inquiry that studies humans as group members, and a comparative science that examines all societies, ancient and modern, simple and complex. This definition tells us that anthropology relies on structure, logic, reason, and critical thinking. Fourth and finally, we may consider the definition, anthropology is less subject matter than a bond between subject matters. And this particular definition is one that I would like to emphasize because it communicates that anthropological research is interdisciplinary. And when you think about how anthropology is a holistic discipline, concerned with all aspects of human life, this makes perfect sense. You can't study human biology in isolation and expect to fully understand the human experience. Likewise, you can't expect to study culture in isolation, or language in isolation, and understand the human experience. Anthropological research must necessarily take into account the biological, cultural, social, historical, psychological, and economic factors at the heart of the human experience. This leads us to what is called the biocultural approach, which is one of the hallmarks of anthropology. Anthropologists seek to understand humans as both the product of biology, that which has been inherited genetically, and culture, that which has been acquired or constructed through sociocultural processes. The interrelationship between biology and culture is of particular interest to biological anthropologists. The development of human biology in the course of our evolution has been affected by culture, and the development of culture has in turn been affected by the development of biology. So biological anthropologists are interested in studying that. The article that you have to read for this week on anthropology and biogeography will help drive this point home. Okay, now that we've defined what anthropology is, we're going to take a look at the four-field approach to anthropology as is commonly taught in the United States. I should add a little bit of a caveat in the sense that most anthropologists do not specialize in all four fields of anthropology. Having noted that, let's take a look at the definitions for the four fields. First, you have biological anthropology, which is the subject of this course, which is the study of human evolution and variation. Next, you have cultural anthropology, which is the study of modern human societies through the analysis of the origins, evolution, and variation of culture. Third, you have archaeology, the study of the human past primarily through its material remains. And fourth, you have linguistic anthropology, which is the study of the construction, use, and form of language in humans. I will note that these first three subfields tend to be the major fields that you will encounter in anthropology departments throughout the United States. Linguistic anthropology doesn't get quite as much attention as the first three. As a result, in this lecture, we are going to focus on those first three and taking a closer look at those. First, let's talk about archaeology. For many people, their first and only introduction to archaeology is Indiana Jones. Now, I'm not speaking from first-hand knowledge because I have honestly never seen any of the Indiana Jones movies, but I can assure you that Indiana Jones is not an accurate representation of what archaeologists do. Many people will also associate Jurassic Park and Jurassic World with archaeology. This is also not accurate because the scientists in those movies are paleontologists, not archaeologists. Archaeologists deal with humans. So just to kind of address those two Hollywood associations, the image on your screen is an accurate depiction of archaeologists conducting work because it's a real image of archaeologists excavating at Çatalhöyük, which is a 9,000-year-old Neolithic settlement site in what is now Turkey. It's a site that's of particular interest to archaeologists because of its of the art that has been discovered there. Let's take a closer look at archaeology, also known as archaeological anthropology. As mentioned before, archaeology is the study of the human past primarily through its material remains. One of the major categories of archaeological evidence, and the one that you may be most familiar with, is the artifact. Artifacts are humanly made or modified portable objects, and they can be the subject of several lines of inquiry. For instance, if an archaeologist was to take a single clay pot, they could analyze its form in order to learn about the pot's function and use. They could study the decorations and design on the pot in order to learn about the worldview, symbolism, and ideology of the people who created it. They could analyze the chemical composition of the pot in order to determine the source of the material that was used, and they can also date the artifact and the associated site in order to establish a bit of a chronology. Now, while there's much that you can learn from a single artifact, one of the key concepts in archaeology is context. You want to be able to place that particular artifact in its context, its broader context, whether that's the site or the particular artifacts that are discovered nearby, or whatever that may be. Context is key. While the study of material culture is integral to archaeology, archaeologists also study written records and oral traditions. Now, if you think about it for just a minute, if you're trying to piece together a more complete picture of the past, and you have both written records and the material record available to you, then why not use both? Why not try to bring together as many sources of evidence as you can and interweave them in order to create the most complete picture of the past that you can? And that is why archaeologists will also use those different sources. Finally, archaeology may be thought of as the past tense of cultural anthropology. Moving on to cultural anthropology, the individual that you see in the image on your screen is the famous American cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead, who was also one of the most influential public intellectuals of the 20th century. Mead is perhaps most notable for her research on the experiences of youth growing up in Samoa. She compared her research with what she was observing in American society in order to argue that the transition to adulthood in America was made more stressful and difficult than in Samoa due to cultural differences between the two. Let's take a closer look at cultural anthropology, also known as sociocultural anthropology or social anthropology. As mentioned before, cultural anthropology is the study of modern human societies through the analysis of the origins, evolution, and variation of culture. Now, there are many different ways to define culture, including the textbook definition, which is that culture is learned behavior transmitted from person to person. Now, while this is a perfectly acceptable definition of culture for the purposes of our class, there are many cultural anthropologists, I imagine, who might take issue with it as being too formal, maybe too biological. They would argue that it doesn't adequately capture the fact that culture is a dynamic process. So here are a couple other definitions of culture for you to consider. One is from the American Sociological Association, which defines culture as the languages, customs, beliefs, rules, arts, knowledge, and collective identities and memories developed by members of all social groups that make their social environments meaningful. Another definition from the Center for Intercultural Learning is that culture rules virtually every aspect of your life. It is taught and learned and shared. It is not monolithic, and it is symbolic. As you can see from the small sample of definitions, a lot of time and effort have been invested in articulating an adequate concept of culture. Given that culture is integral to cultural anthropological research, and important to the social sciences more broadly, this investment is probably justified. Note that even today there is no one universally accepted definition of culture, because it's so difficult to define. Nonetheless, some definitions are more useful than others. But like I said, the textbook definition is perfectly adequate for the purposes of our class. A key idea in cultural anthropology, with broader implications for our approach to understanding humanity, is cultural relativism. Essentially, it is the idea that behavior in one culture should not be judged by the standards of another culture. Almost all anthropologists would agree that there are some limitations to this, however. Some cultural practices are so fundamentally unjust, or diminish human dignity and freedom, that cultural relativism provides little, if any, defense against external criticism. Cultural anthropological research is mostly qualitative, meaning that cultural anthropologists will conduct interviews and observations to better understand the phenomena that they study. One method made famous by Margaret Mead in her work was participant observation, which involves the integration of the researcher into the society being studied and the researcher's engagement with those aspects of life under investigation to try and obtain the perspective of an insider as to what life is like. These research methods and the data subsequently collected are used to write what is called an ethnography. An ethnography provides an account of a particular community, society, culture, or cultural phenomenon. It is the anthropologist's way of taking the various bits and pieces of information that they've gathered, assembling them, and trying to make sense of what it all means for our understanding of the human condition. Finally, let's talk about biological anthropology, which is what we're going to spend the rest of our semester talking about. In the image on your screen, you see the famous primatologist Jane Goodall studying and observing the behavior of two chimpanzees. Now you may be asking yourself, why should we study chimpanzees? Well, for one, chimpanzees are our closest living relative. We share a last common ancestor with them dating back to around 8 to 10 million years ago. It's also the case that, as we are both primates, we share quite a few characteristics in common with them. Chimpanzees, like us, can use tools. They have complex communication systems, and they can form long-lasting social relationships. For these reasons, and because of the 50 million years of primate ancestry that we share with them, biological anthropologists will study their behavior and lifestyle in order to learn more about our evolutionary past. Let's take a closer look at biological anthropology, also sometimes called physical anthropology. As mentioned before, biological anthropology is the study of human evolution and biocultural variation. Now, there are two key ideas driving the study of biological anthropology. The first is that all humans are a product of their evolutionary history. And the second is that all humans are a product of their individual life history. Here are a few of the major questions that we will be exploring this semester. The first is, what is the theory of evolution and what causes evolutionary change? Given that we're going to be talking about human evolution more specifically, it is important to start by building a foundation of knowledge about evolutionary theory and evolutionary processes more broadly, and then apply those to our discussion of human evolution. So we'll be spending the first few weeks of this course talking about evolution in general. Second, who are we as a species? Third, what does it mean to be human, which we'll talk a little bit about today? And fourth, where did we come from? These are the questions that will be driving our discussions throughout the semester. Now let's talk a little bit about what biological anthropologists study. Biological anthropologists study living people, other primates, past peoples, past societies, and all aspects of human biology. This means that a biological anthropologist would be interested in phenomena as diverse as chimpanzee behavior, as previously mentioned, a fossil hominin dating back 6 million years, and human remains from medieval Europe, such as those being excavated in the image on the right from a medieval church cemetery in Tuscany, Italy, where they would then be taken to a laboratory and analyzed to learn more about health and living conditions in medieval Europe. Now we know that biological anthropology is one of the fields of anthropology. Yet the field of biological anthropology itself is so expansive, as we saw in the previous slide, that it may be divided into 3 subfields. These are primatology, the study of non-human primates, paleoanthropology, the study of the origins and development of humans, primarily through fossils and other remains, and human biology, the study of human variation. Now we may add to these 3 major subfields of biological anthropology a 4th, and that is forensic anthropology. Forensic anthropology is the scientific examination of skeletons in hope of identifying the people whose bodies they came from, as well as how they died and how long ago they died. So a forensic anthropologist would be the sort of person who might be called in to help with a criminal case. Now, for the purposes of this course, we will be focusing on the first 3 subfields: primatology, paleoanthropology, and human biology. So now that we've finished our overview of anthropology and biological anthropology, we have reached our first lecture break. Now, obviously, you can take a break whenever you want. You don't have to wait for lecture breaks. But I will be including these in videos as a sort of reminder that this might be an appropriate opportunity to take a break, because we will have just finished one of the major topics of discussion for the lecture. So for example, if you were to stop now and revisit this lecture tomorrow, you would know by returning to this particular moment in the video that you had the 6 big events of human evolution, what is science, why is biological anthropology a science, and the 4 Mertonian norms of science left to learn about. I will also be including timestamps in the description of the video so that you know where to pick up based on what topics that you have left to learn about. Welcome back to everyone returning from break, and for everyone else, let's continue. As I mentioned previously, one of the major questions that we will be exploring this semester is what makes us human? There are a few different approaches to answering this question, one of which is to focus on one essential characteristic or feature that sets us apart from other species. So for instance, a scholar might point to our capacity for speech, or they might point to the advent of agriculture and what that has enabled human societies to do in terms of increasing their populations. Another approach that I will be discussing here, which is not to say that you necessarily have to agree, but just to introduce you to this particular approach, is to think about a suite of characteristics that makes humans unique. The 6 characteristics that we will be focusing on are bipedalism, non-honing chewing, material culture and tools, speech, hunting, and domesticated foods. The first big event of human evolution that we're going to talk about is bipedalism. Humans are committed to bipedalism, or walking on 2 feet. One of the benefits of bipedalism over quadrupedalism, which is walking on 4 feet, pertains to efficiency and energy expenditure, as it improves our performance in long-distance running, such as in marathons. Later in the semester, we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of bipedalism in more detail. No other primate is an obligate biped. While gorillas and other non-human primates can temporarily stand or walk on 2 legs, they are obligate quadrupeds. Now, the earliest evidence of bipedalism among our hominin ancestors dates back to around 6 to 8 million years ago. The development of bipedalism has had tremendous implications for our evolutionary history, and we will be discussing these implications and the anatomical markers of bipedalism later in this course. The second big event of human evolution was the development of the non-honing canine. As you see from the image in the bottom right, apes have large projecting canines for slashing food, and a diastema in the lower jaw to accommodate them. They have what is called a canine premolar honing complex, which functions to sharpen or hone their upper canines. Around 5.5 million years ago, our hominin ancestors began to develop a non-honing canine complex. This means that humans have comparatively smaller upper and lower canines than apes, that our canines have relatively dull edges, and that we do not have a diastema in our lower jaw, as you can see in the image on the top right. We will learn more about the non-honing and honing canines in Chapter 6 of the Larson textbook. The third big event of human evolution was the development of material culture and tool use. Humans are dependent upon culture, and especially the part of culture expressed as tools, instruments, and objects, also known as material culture, for survival. Think about the different tools that you use on a day-to-day basis, everything from phones and laptops to textbooks and writing instruments. At a more fundamental level, material culture encompasses clothing, shelter, our tools for acquiring and processing food, and our different means of transportation. While humans are not the only type of animal that uses material culture, it can easily be said that our material culture is significantly more complex than that of any non-human species. When did our ancestors first begin to use tools? Up until recently, the earliest evidence of tool use dated back to around 2.6 million years ago. Just a few years ago, however, biological anthropologists working in Kenya discovered stone tools dating to around 3.3 million years ago. Our hominin ancestors very likely used tools even earlier than this, but those tools, those made of organic materials for instance, tend to be unidentifiable and not preserved. Another major event in human evolution was the development of speech. Humans stand alone in their ability to speak, and through speech, express complex thoughts and ideas. Pinpointing when speech developed in the course of human evolution is difficult. Audio recording technology did not exist millions of years ago. Nonetheless, there are certain anatomical and genetic markers that provide clues as to when speech may have developed, such as the shape and structure of the hyoid bone. Our ability to express complex thoughts and ideas through speech has had a significant impact on every aspect of our lives, from the social to the political. The final 2 big events of human evolution that we will discuss are hunting and domesticated foods. Hunting, for our purposes, has a relatively specific meaning. When we say that hunting is one of the big events of human evolution, we refer to the social behavior whereby a group of people organize themselves to pursue animals for food. While some non-human primates organize to pursue prey, they do not use tools or travel long distances as humans do during hunts. One of the most significant developments in all of human history was the domestication of plants and animals, the origins of agriculture. The historian Yuval Noah Harari, in his book Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, argues that it is agriculture that transformed humans from an ordinary, low-impact species to the creatures of immense significance that we are today. We will evaluate this argument and the impact of the adoption of agriculture on human evolution towards the end of the semester. Archaeological evidence indicates that the domestication of plants and animals began around 10,000 to 11,000 years ago. Now that we've discussed the 6 big events of human evolution, it is time for another lecture break. Among other things, biological anthropology is a science. You all know that subjects like biology, chemistry, and physics are classified as, quote, science, but what makes something a science? Science is a question-driven, evidence-based understanding of the natural world. That is, science is not just a collection of random facts about atoms and chemical structures and biological processes. Rather, science provides an approach to obtaining knowledge about those phenomena and so much more. Biological anthropology, insofar as it entails the pursuit of a question-driven, evidence-based understanding of human evolution and variation, is a science. Perhaps you still want some clarification about what makes something a science. Let's think about it another way. If you were to read a bit about philosophy or the philosophy of science, you may encounter the terms epistemology, ontology, and semiotics. Epistemology concerns what can be known and how we can know it. Ontology is about being, or what really is. Semiotics entails how we talk about and understand things. Science is most closely aligned with epistemology. Scientists, committed as they are to obtaining an evidence-based understanding of phenomena, are interested in what can be known from the evidence and how we can know it. What type of evidence would advance our knowledge of the phenomena being studied? Of course, in talking about science, we have to talk about the scientific method. Scientists make observations about the world around them and then formulate questions and problems. For example, referring back to our previous discussion about the 6 big events of human evolution, a biological anthropologist might ask, why do humans walk on 2 legs? Why did we develop the non-honing canine? These are the kinds of questions that lead to research and the collection of data and evidence that can be used to test hypotheses, or possible explanations for these questions. Sometimes the data supports the hypothesis, sometimes the data refutes the hypothesis. This process is known as the scientific method. When a number of related hypotheses all fit together in a manner that can explain a natural phenomenon, we call that a theory. Unfortunately, the word theory has taken on a different meaning in everyday language. It is sometimes thought of as a wild guess. That's not the case in science. A theory in science is a robust idea that explains the natural world and predicts the results of future investigations. Now, it is also commonly believed that when a theory reaches some level of proof, it's promoted to a law. And that's also not true. A theory is fundamentally and qualitatively different from a scientific law. A theory seeks to explain natural phenomena, whereas a law is a statement of fact that describes natural phenomena. One final topic that I would like to address that's not really discussed in the textbook is how to think critically about science. Scientific pursuits are crucial to enhancing our understanding of the natural world, and modern science has been extraordinarily productive, not to mention transformative. Yet science itself is not immune from thoughtful critique. Science, as it is practiced, organized, and theorized today, is an innovation of relatively recent origin. Modern science is not timeless or universal. As with most all human endeavors, modern science is shaped by the prevailing social, cultural, and political events of the present day. We seek to understand its flaws and shortcomings so that we can improve it. We can start by identifying the norms and value systems at the core of modern science, and then compare those norms to the actual practice of modern science. The sociologist Robert Merton argues that there are 4 norms that comprise the ethos of modern science. The first, universalism, is the idea that the acceptance or rejection of scientific claims should not depend on the personal or social attributes of the scientist. The second, communalism, is the idea that scientific research is the product of social collaboration and therefore should be assigned to the community, which is to say that it should be shared with the scientific community and it should be made publicly available. The third, disinterestedness, is the idea that science is a fair and open search for truth. And the fourth, organized skepticism, is the idea that scientific research should be subject to the exacting scrutiny of fellow experts. It should be subject to the detached scrutiny of those experts. These 4 norms describe the behavior expected of scientists, including biological anthropologists. Scientists are human, however, and their behavior does not always live up to these standards. For example, some of you may be familiar with the open access movement, which strives to make academic research more freely accessible. As it stands, many journal articles and publications require significant sums of money to access. The American Journal of Physical Anthropology, for instance, which is one of the leading journals of biological anthropology, costs over $4,000 for an institutional subscription. This cost barrier directly conflicts with the norm of communalism, which has as its expectation that the results of academic research are freely shared. At the same time, the publisher of the journal would probably argue that the subscription fee is necessary to sustain the journal's activities. These are not matters with easy resolutions, is what I would say. But ultimately, the point is that scientific practice does not always match up to expectations. We should view scientific research through a reasoned, thoughtful, critical lens. And so I'm going to ask that you take a moment, and reflect just a little bit on other examples of science not living up to the norms on this slide. And that's the end of the lecture for week 1, everyone. In this lecture, you learned about what anthropology is, what biological anthropology is, the study of human evolution and variation. You learned about the 6 big events of human evolution: bipedalism, the non-honing canine, material culture and tool use, speech, hunting, and domesticated foods. You learned about what science is, a question-driven, evidence-based understanding of the natural world. You learned about why biological anthropology is a science, and you learned about the 4 Mertonian norms of science: universalism, communalism, disinterestedness, and organized skepticism. If you have any questions about the material, about this lecture, about the readings, do make sure and let me know. Send me an email. Also, if you have any questions about the class in general, please let me know. I would be more than happy to answer those questions. Thank you all for your time, and have a good week.